Mr. Hobbins' Beautiful Things, written by Jeannie Bruning and illustrated by Carolyn Keither. Mr. Hobbins loved beautiful things. He loved fancy plates that hung on the wall. He had paintings of sunsets and oceans, paintings of animals in the jungle, and polar bears in the Arctic. Mr. Hobbins also loved collecting vases. He had vases in all shapes and sizes. Mr. Hobbins' home was filled with beauty. Hundreds of pictures hung on the walls. There were huge cabinets that were filled with very fancy things. It seemed like the more things Mr. Hobbins had around him, the happier he was. Mrs. Hobbins also loved beautiful things. As the years went by, however, Mrs. Hobbins found it more and more difficult getting around the house. "Can't we sell some of this stuff?" she would ask. "It's so crowded in this house, I can barely move around." "Sell these beautiful things?" Mr. Hobbins would reply. "Unthinkable! These are my beautiful things. I could never sell them." Just when Mrs. Hobbins thought there was no more room, Mr. Hobbins would arrive with more packages. "More stuff?" Mrs. Hobbins would ask. "This is not stuff," replied Mr. Hobbins. "These are beautiful things." The closets were so full that Mrs. Hobbins quit trying to keep them neat. Piles of unopened boxes lined the hallway. The stacks grew. The piles piled higher. The doors wouldn't shut and the drawers wouldn't close. But Mr. Hobbins was happy. He had all his beautiful things. One morning as Mrs. Hobbins made her way to the kitchen for a cup of tea, she tripped over another stack of unopened boxes. She marched into the living room, threw up her arms, and exclaimed, "We must get rid of some of this stuff." "Impossible," replied Mr. Hobbins. "Each of these beautiful things is precious to me." "Well," huffed Mrs. Hobbins, "I think your beautiful things mean more to you than I do." "Nonsense," replied Mr. Hobbins. One cloudy afternoon, Mrs. Hobbins arrived home from the store. When she opened the back door, piles of new boxes blocked her path. Like some huge monster sitting in the hallway. "Enough! Mr. Hobbins has so much stuff. There is no room for me. I'm going to visit my sister." Mrs. Hobbins got back in her car and drove away. It was starting to get dark. Mr. Hobbins realized he hadn't seen Mrs. Hobbins. He had been very busy unpacking new collection of wooden soldiers. He called out to her, "Mrs. Hobbins!" There was no answer. Mr. Hobbins looked around the room. He saw his figurines and his beautiful vases and his elegant clocks. But something was different. Something had changed. For the first time ever, Mr. Hobbins felt alone. "Oh, Mrs. Hobbins, where could you have gone?" "Don't worry, Captain. She'll come back. Even if she doesn't, you'll be just fine. You have us, and you love us." Mr. Hobbins glanced across the table and noticed one of the wooden soldiers, hands clasped behind his back, marching back and forth. "Yes, Captain," the wooden soldier said. "You might be better off without her. She doesn't love us nearly as much as you do. You will have much more time to spend with us. You love us." "Well, you may be right about that. Mrs. Hobbins does not enjoy taking care of all these beautiful things, but—" "Oh, you are so right about that," said another voice, coming from a shelf above the window. "When Mrs. Hobbins dusts up here, she does not handle us as lovingly as you do. She just dusts us off and puts us right back. Not like you, sir. You love us so much. The voice was coming from a bright orange vase, and the vase was bent over, looking directly at him. Well, Mrs. Hobbins has many other things she has to do. She does not have time to talk to each one of you like I do, said Mr. Hobbins. Whatever, said the vase as she rolled her eyes.
All I know is that no one in the whole world loves us as much as you do.
Mr. Hobbins turned around and was eye to eye with his jungle painting. Looking directly at him was the elephant, swinging his giant head back and forth as he spoke.
She has never taken one moment to tell us how magnificent we are.
The lion and crocodile and zebra all nodded in agreement.
We do not need her. We have you, and you love us.
At that very moment, hundreds of voices from all over the house began giving their opinion of Mrs. Hobbins. The clocks were complaining that she didn't stop to hear them chime every hour. The music boxes griped that she never really appreciated their songs. The plates did not like how she hung them. The candlesticks felt like she ignored them. The cups did not think she used them enough. The hats didn't feel worn enough. And the lamps didn't feel bright enough. Mr. Hobbins could even hear mumbling coming from the unopened boxes. "I can't hear you all. One at a time, please," shouted Mr. Hobbins. And for 1 second everything got quiet. Then from all over the house Mr. Hobbins heard, "But you love us more. You love us more than anyone. Yes, you love us. We are all you need because you love us. You know you love us. You love us." "Oh my," sighed Mr. Hobbins. "You are all very beautiful, and you all are very special to me. I do enjoy taking care of you, and I do love you, but that is not enough. I love you, but you cannot love me back. That is why I miss Mrs. Hobbins. That is why I need Mrs. Hobbins. She loves me." Mr. Hobbins heard the keys jingling in the back door. He jumped up from the table, leaped over the boxes, and made his way to the back hall. As Mrs. Hobbins opened the door, she was not greeted by a huge monster of boxes she had seen, but by Mr. Hobbins, with a grin that spread from ear to ear. "Oh, Mrs. Hobbins, you have come home." Mr. Hobbins put his arms around her and gave her a gentle kiss. "Mrs. Hobbins, I do love you." "I love you too," said Mrs. Hobbins. I know, said Mr. Hobbins, "and that is better than all the stuff in the world."